represented by the Minister for Defence.
I thank the Prime Minister. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Since the beginning of the year, at least 622 aged care residents have died of COVID, more than double the number of deaths in the whole of last year. It's only the 8th of February. Will the Prime Minister admit responsibility for this crisis?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The pandemic takes a heavy toll in this country, as it has, Mr Speaker, over the course of this pandemic. And, Mr Speaker, since the beginning of this year, it is true that in aged care facilities, 587 people, as at the 7th of February, had died with COVID. Mr Speaker, I note also that since the 1st of January of this year, up until the 28th of January, some 4,141 people who are in aged care have passed away. Since the onset of Omicron, some 682 people have died in aged care facilities, Mr Speaker, who have had Omicron, and some 9,141 people who have been residents in aged care have passed away. It has been an incredibly—
Member for Hotham.
It has been an incredibly tough time for those who have been working in those facilities, Mr Speaker, with the onset of Omicron, and it has been incredibly tough for those families who have had to say goodbye to loved ones over that period of time. And, Mr Speaker, at every occasion throughout the course of this pandemic, we have sought to provide every single support we possibly can to ensure that we can be assisting both the workforce and those who are engaged in providing that care to those in those facilities. And, Mr Speaker, while less than 10% of those who have passed away in residential aged care facilities may have died with COVID, Mr Speaker, the other issue that the government has been very focused on is not just those who have had COVID, Mr Speaker, but the quality of care that can be provided to people living in residential aged care facilities during this very challenging time.
Member for Barton.
Mr Speaker, some may wish to pretend that the pandemic and that COVID cannot have an impact to the most vulnerable in our communities. But, Mr Speaker, that would be naive and that would be misleading and that would be false. Mr Speaker, our government will continue to do everything we can to support those in residential aged care facilities and those working with them, as not only in Australia but around the world. We work to try and provide support to those who are most vulnerable. And, Mr Speaker, we would seek the support of all of those, whether in this chamber or elsewhere, in joining together to help provide that support and assurance to those who need our help and are getting their help, whether it's from the clinical support they're getting through the aged care facilities or indeed, most recently even now, members of our own Defence Forces who are going in to support that important work. Mr Speaker, we will continue to apply every effort, working with state and territory governments all around the country to provide every support we can through this pandemic, where Australia has one of the lowest fatality rates in the world.
The Prime Minister's time has expired, and I give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Prime Minister. In an uncertain global environment, it's crucial that decisions for our country's future are grounded in clear and consistent values and principles. Will the Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison government's National Economic Plan is strengthening our economy for a stronger future?
The Prime Minister. Just before I call the Prime Minister, the interjections on my left are too high. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for her question, and I thank you, the member for Robertson, for your great work over the summer leading the inquiry into the social media bill, which is designed to stand up to trolls and big tech companies, Mr Speaker, and I thank you for the work you've been doing in listening, Mr Speaker, to the real and genuine concerns of Australians, Mr Speaker. I don't know why those opposites are interjecting on me commending a member who was doing that work, Mr Speaker. Those opposite can explain themselves at another time.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Whoever made that unparliamentary comment, I didn't see who it was. I'd ask them to withdraw it. Order.
Mr Speaker, I believe you're referring to me, but I said the Prime Minister was a fraud, and I do not believe that is unparliamentary.
It is unparliamentary, and
Well, I
ask him to
withdraw.
it. The Prime Minister has the call.
The trolls aren't limited to the internet, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We are on track as a nation, Mr Speaker, to have the lowest rate of unemployment in this country in 50 years, Mr Speaker. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our country, Mr Speaker, in the months ahead over the course of 2022 for us to have an unemployment rate with a 3 in front of it. And, Mr Speaker, this is an achievement of the Australian people, the business owners of this country, the workers of this country, Mr Speaker, who have pushed forward throughout this pandemic. At the same time, right now, an unemployment rate of 4.2%, an unemployment rate amongst young people of 9.8%, Mr Speaker, half what it was at the peak of the pandemic, Mr Speaker, and in the lowest level we've seen since 2008. Under our government, 1 million more women are back in work under the policies of our government, Mr Speaker. 700,000 jobs were saved by JobKeeper as a result of the policies of our government, and there are 220,000 Australians who are trade apprentices in training right now, which is the highest level this country has seen since records were kept in 1963. Our economy is one of the strongest in the world, pushing out of this pandemic. And, Mr Speaker, that sets up a great opportunity for this country as we come out of this pandemic stronger than most of the advanced economies in this world. It isn't just about reclaiming what was lost from over the COVID period, Mr Speaker. It's about a new era of economic opportunity for this country. We have maintained our AAA credit rating. The business confidence is returning, Mr Speaker, and it's based on a strong plan. A plan of lower taxes and cutting red tape. A plan of investing in the infrastructure and skills development, which sets us up for the future. Thirdly, Mr Speaker, reliable, affordable energy. Fourthly, a data and digital economy that will be in the top 10 of the world by 2030, and continuing to build our sovereign capability as we see a resurgence in the manufacturing industries of this country under our policies. That's the plan for Australia's future, Mr Speaker. That's a plan that Australians are backing and can back.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. The member for Hotham has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. On February 2nd, when more than 500 people had already died of COVID in aged care this year and residents were being left without food and water, the Minister for Aged Care Services said the system was functioning, quote, exceptionally well. Today, he's again refused in the other place to say the system is in crisis. Why has the Prime Minister not sacked this minister?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'll ask the Minister for Aged Care to add to my answer. Mr Speaker, as I remarked in response to the earlier question today from the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, this pandemic is taking a heavy toll on the entire world and on Australia, Mr Speaker, and particularly our most vulnerable and our most frail, Mr Speaker, are in the most vulnerable of all positions. I think we all understand that. And, Mr Speaker, while international comparisons I know provide no comfort to those who have lost loved ones, we do know that the outbreaks, Mr Speaker, in Canada, for example, are around 13 times greater than what we see in this country. We do know that Australia's fatality rate is one of the lowest in the world and certainly, Mr Speaker, amongst the OECD countries. And we do know that the investments that we have made, the changing of close contact rules, the investment in the boosted wage payments, Mr Speaker, of aged care workers, including those working in non-care settings, Mr Speaker, are all assisting the sector to deal with a big challenge. But those who pretend that the pandemic can have no impact, Mr Speaker, are misleading Australians and, Mr Speaker, are diminishing the scale of what is a very difficult challenge. And I'll ask the Minister for Aged Care to add further to my answer.
The Minister for Health, the member for Cooper. Minister for Health has a call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do recognise that this has been a very challenging time for many people in Australia, in aged care and, of course, around the world. In particular, over the course of the summer. We've been working very closely with our aged care facilities and have dispatched over 48 million units of PPE in 2022 alone. That includes a total now of 10.9 million rapid antigen tests to aged care facilities, which commenced in August of last year and has included over 6.7 million
the Minister for
this
Health
year.
will resume his seat. The point of order.
The Prime Minister and the Minister have now had 2 minutes to go to the point of this question, and that is about the incompetence of the Minister for Aged Care Services. Could they please address that key part of the question?
Well, the member for Hotham would know that the question was directed at, in effect, the state of the aged care sector, and the Minister for Health is being directly relevant. The Minister for Health has the call.
In terms of the specific response to support the aged care sector, which I would hope is the real concern of every person in this House, masks 14.8 million units, gloves 17.5 million units, gowns 5.9 million units, goggles 3.9 million units. All of these are real actions that have been taken to support that sector. In addition to that, the changed furlough requirements were fundamental to ensuring the continuity of workforce. That's both in terms of the definition of close contact, but also the capacity in critical sectors such as aged care for asymptomatic close contacts to work. That's been backed up by 80,000 shifts which have been put in place by the government, and in addition the support for workforce retention and now the ADF.
The member for Cowper has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. This week, the Morrison-Joyce government announced the reopening of our international borders. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please update the House on how the aviation and transport sectors will facilitate international travellers and help boost the tourist economy? And is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternate approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and also briefly would also like to acknowledge the great service of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as both in her service to the Commonwealth and her example to the world on the dignity of high office. Mr Speaker, obviously tourism is incredibly important, and I note the member for Cowper, and especially places such as Port Macquarie and Coffs Harbour, that rely so heavily on what was a peak of 1.2 million passengers a month, which in the midst of the pandemic went down to merely 6,500. This caused incredible stress on so many businesses throughout the member for Cowper's electorate. But not only the member for Cowper, but the tourism industry that is seen in such things as Uluru, Alice Springs and Kakadu in the member for Lingiari's seat, or in the member for Dawson, the Great Barrier Reef and Whitsundays, or the member for Leichhardt with Cairns, the Great Barrier Reef, Capricornia, Carnarvon Gorge, Great Keppel Island, Mount Etna National Park, and it goes on. In the member for Hunter's seat, who's not here today, the wineries of Pecolpin and Barrington Tops. So, Mr Speaker, it is with great pleasure that we once more open up our nation to get ourselves back onto the footing on the tourism industry that we were beforehand, to meet the position that we've reached, especially on an economic basis with the great work of the Treasurer, with the exceptionally low unemployment and economic growth. The CEO of Qantas last night contacted me directly, telling me that there was, and I quote, "great news about the international borders means Australia is truly open for business. Fantastic for the industry as a whole and for the regions that have been doing it tough without the flow of tourists and labour. Thanks for staying the course." And in noting staying the course, he of course notes the great support that was given by the Commonwealth Government to keep the airline industry in a position where they can be the greatest beneficiaries of now this new opening. This is going to be incredibly important that people such as Virgin Australia also get back in the air. And the CEO, Jane Herdlicker, said, "Today's announcement made by the Australian Government is an important step forward in reigniting the travel industry and opening Australia to the rest of the world at a critical time of recovery. This will also come as positive news for travellers looking to reconnect with loved ones in Australia and will be a huge boost for our tourism industry. Of course, it goes without saying, I go back to the member for Cowper and the immense work he has done for the travel agents. We will note that the travel agents also will be looking forward to the reopening of these borders and the reinvigoration of their income stream.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced the Defence Forces would be operating in aged care after repeatedly ruling it out on the 13th of January, 19th of January, 4th of February and other times. Why does the Prime Minister reject good ideas time and time again before always taking action which is too little, too late, and after a problem becomes a crisis?
The Prime Minister has.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When will the Leader of the Opposition stop trying to politicise the pandemic, Mr Speaker? Because time and again, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Labor Party continues to misrepresent the facts, Mr Speaker. I simply said in January, Mr Speaker,
the Prime Minister will resume his seat for one moment. I'm trying to listen to the answer. I can't hear the answer when there's such noise on my left. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I made the point quite openly and honestly that the suggestion that the Defence Forces could be a replacement workforce for the aged care sector, Mr Speaker, was not a realistic option. That's all I've said, Mr Speaker. And that is not, Mr Speaker, what the government has now done. And I was very clear, Mr Speaker, yesterday about what the targeted involvement would be of the Defence Forces, as I asked them, Mr Speaker, on the very day the Leader of the Labor Party accuses me, Mr Speaker, of saying they have no role. On the very day, Mr Speaker, or thereabouts, I spoke to the Vice Chief of the Defence Force and asked him to work, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition, on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. It goes to relevance. The Prime Minister said, I've seen the suggestion that Defence Forces can go in and operate in aged care.
No, that's not the case. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. There's no valid point of order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Labor Party can snarl and growl all he likes, Mr Speaker, as he has done over the course of this pandemic, Mr Speaker, as he has constantly been negative when it comes to the serious challenges that our country has faced. And he can seek to downplay, Mr Speaker, Australians' efforts in how we've come through this pandemic with his constant negativity, snarling and growling, Mr Speaker. But the facts are these. On each occasion, we have worked to address the situation that we have had before us, Mr Speaker. On each and every occasion, we have sought to apply the resources, whether they be the Defence Forces, indeed our own public service officers and those around the country, to address the needs that have been required, and particularly in the aged care sector, Mr Speaker, where our Defence Forces were applied in Victoria during the second wave and are now being used in a similar way with targeted interventions, Mr Speaker, not with the wholesale replacement of the aged care workforce, which, if the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Labor Party, was actually interested in solving the problem, then he would have attended himself to the facts of those issues. The Leader of the Labor Party is all about exploiting this pandemic, Mr Speaker, not about addressing it, Mr Speaker.
The member for Melbourne has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister. Isn't it the case that if your religious discrimination bill is passed, even with your amendments, a school can sack an unmarried teacher because she's pregnant if it's against the school's beliefs? A doctor can tell their patient that their sickness is a punishment from God because they're gay, and a student can be expelled because they're transgender. We all support protecting religious groups from victimisation, but why are you using the dying days of this parliament to push through a Trojan horse for hate that will mean more discrimination, not less?
Just before the Prime Minister rises, I'm concerned, I'm happy to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business and the Leader of the House. I'm concerned that the question involves legal opinion. I'm happy to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business. Does the member for Melbourne wish to rephrase the question?
I wish to address that point, your point of order.
The member for Melbourne has the call.
Speaker, that goes to questions about things that the Prime Minister has said previously about what is in this bill and what is not in this bill and the effect of this bill. So it is asking about things that the Prime Minister has already said. It is about what the effect of legislation will be, not giving about legal advice about an existing situation, but what will be the case if legislation is passed. If you can't ask government ministers what will be the effect of your laws if they are passed, because it amounts to legal advice, then none of us can ask anything about any government legislation in this parliament.
The Prime Minister, I accept the explanation of the member for Melbourne. The Prime Minister has...
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very happy to answer the member's question. If he is seeking a legal opinion on the matters that he's raised about what the impacts are as he's outlined them, then he should check with the member for Isaacs, Mr Speaker, because the very issues that the member raises are a result, Mr Speaker, of the laws introduced by the Labor Party in relation to transgender children, children of different sexual orientation. Those laws, Mr Speaker, prevent the expulsion of those students, Mr Speaker, or allow the expulsion of those students, were introduced by the Labor Party when they were last in government, Mr
Member for
Speaker.
Goldstein. Member for Goldstein.
So, Mr Speaker, I'm asked as to whether I should be coming here and making changes to laws that were introduced by the Labor Party that have the exact effect of what you are speaking about. What I am introducing, Mr Speaker, and what I introduced at this dispatch box was a set of positive laws which weren't about the Sexual Discrimination Act, Mr Speaker, about positive laws that prevent discrimination against people of religious faith or who have no religious faith. And the issues that are contained in that bill do not provide the powers to do the things that you talk about. Those powers exist in the law as it stands today, as was introduced by the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, when they were last in government. So our laws, Mr Speaker, are about saying to all of those Australians that have come from places far and wide around the globe, and we're at an Greek Orthodox church today, but we could have easily been at a Maronite church. We could have easily been at a Coptic Orthodox church, Mr Speaker, and we could have been at those churches, and I can tell you their parishioners would say this to you, as Bishop Tarabay has said to me, a good friend of many in this chamber. They came here to flee religious persecution and discrimination, and they came to this country believing this was a country where those things would be protected, and they are finding that not to be their experience. So I'm prepared to legislate on behalf of our government how I took this to the Australian people, and they supported us. And they supported us, Mr Speaker, and they supported at the ballot box those protections being provided to people of religious faith. Now, if those in this chamber want to speak about multiculturalism and how great a multicultural society it is, then they must acknowledge the role of faith and culture in this country. And if they want to support multiculturalism in this chamber, then I urge them to support the bill, Mr Speaker, because I know the faith communities of suburban Melbourne, whether they be, Mr Speaker, the Sikhs or the Hindus or the Muslims of Sydney and Melbourne or the Christians of northwestern Sydney or Queensland or southern Tasmania or northern Tasmania, wherever you happen to be. If you support religious freedom and opposing religious discrimination, support the bill.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. I give the call to the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House how the Morrison government's strong and principled economic management is driving unemployment to its lowest level in 13 years, and how we plan to generate even more jobs for Australian families and businesses into the future? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lindsay for her question. I had the opportunity to join her recently in her electorate and visit an earth-moving business that was investing in new equipment, Mr Speaker, using our immediate expensing provisions. Now, Mr Speaker, when the Coalition came to government, the unemployment rate was 5.7% and rising. When the Coalition came to government, there were 1 million fewer women in work, Mr Speaker. And when the Coalition came to government, under Labor, 1 in 8 manufacturing jobs were lost. Now, after the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression, the picture is very different. The unemployment rate at 4.2% is at a 13-year low and on track to a 50-year low, Mr Speaker. There are a record number of Australians in a trade apprenticeship, and there are 1.7 million more Australians in work today than when Labor was last in office. Our economic plan is working, investing in skills, lower taxes,
Member for Corangamite,
infrastructure, the digital economy and manufacturing, Mr Speaker. The member for Rankin said the biggest test of the Morrison government's management of the pandemic will be what happens to jobs, Mr Speaker. It was a challenge we readily accepted, and it was a test the member for Rankin's colleagues wished he never set, Mr Speaker. And then the Leader of the Opposition can't be trusted with the Australian economy. The Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, has never had a Treasury portfolio, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition said that our tax cuts for small business and families were for the top end of town, Mr Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition has been in partnership with the Greens and, given it a chance again, would be in partnership again, Mr Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition, as a product of the unions, is too weak.
Order. The Treasurer will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Which union? Name it. Mr Speaker, on direct relevance, this is not relevant. He was invited to talk about other policies. This isn't a policy. This is just
gibberish.
Gibberish.
The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Treasurer is being directly relevant to the question. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Point of order. So that we understand your ruling, Mr Speaker, does this mean that if a question asks for alternative policies, any character assessment can be given, any political rant can be given, anything at all can now be said? Is that the new standard for this chamber? Because it's not a policy approach.
The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The member for Shortland will leave under 94A. The Leader of the House.
That was a very good ruling, Mr Speaker, I might say. Mr Speaker, the way in which the Manager of Opposition Business firstly scoffed at your ruling, if I might say, and then the way in which he showed disrespect to the chair, I think his reflection on the chair, frankly, Mr Speaker, was out of order, first point. The second point, Mr Speaker, is that the Treasurer was entirely within the standing orders, absolutely relevant to the question asked of him. The only aspect of inconvenience here was the proper character assessment from this guy who's got a complete glass jaw.
The Leader of the House will resume his seat. To the point of order. To the point of order. The Treasurer was asked.
Thank you.
The Treasurer was expressly asked in relation to economic management and driving unemployment. He was also asked about whether he was aware of any alternative policies. The Treasurer spoke for some time on economic management. He was not, in my view, attacking the Leader of the Opposition personally. The Treasurer is being directly relevant, and I give the Treasurer the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition expressly supported $387 billion of higher taxes, Mr Speaker, and if given half a chance on the Treasury benches, he will put higher taxes on the Australian people. The Leader of the Opposition, a product of the unions, is too weak to stand up to the unions, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition
The Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr Speaker. This is now putting you in an untenable situation. This is embarrassing. This has nothing to do with any policy. This is some rant about some alleged union I worked for or something. I don't know what it is, but it's an attempted personal character assassination which has nothing to do with the question that was asked.
The Treasurer will return to the substance of the Treasurer will return to the question.
Mr Speaker, the reality is, when it comes to economic management, the Leader of the Labor Party cannot be trusted. He stands for higher taxes. He stands for higher spending, like a $6 billion cash splash. You can't stand there. You just can't stand there.
Point of order?
You just can't stand there.
Well, look, the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Rankin. I'd ask the Leader of the Opposition not to come to the dispatch box early if he's not making a point of order, please. The Leader... The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister agree that it's the job of governments to look after the most vulnerable in our society, and that under this Prime Minister at least 622 aged care residents have died of COVID this year? As of Friday, there's almost 12,000 aged care residents and workers infected with COVID in more than 1,100 facilities. Up to a quarter of shifts are going unfilled. Why has the Prime Minister failed to do his job?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I can confirm, as I did in response to the Leader of the Labor Party's earlier question, that the data I have is that in 2022 so far this year, some 587 persons are deaths reported in residential aged care facilities, Mr Speaker, that are COVID-19 related. And I note the advice that was provided to us just this week, Mr Speaker, by Professor Brendan Murphy, who continues to make this point, that there were some 4,141 Australians living in residential aged care facilities who passed away since the 1st of January this year. And many Australians, we know around 1,000 per week on average pre-COVID, would pass away in aged care facilities each week, Mr Speaker. And as what Professor Murphy has reminded us, is that when people are passing away with COVID, Mr Speaker, that does not necessarily mean, Mr Speaker, that they have passed away because of COVID. That is the medical advice. That is the health advice. And our task, Mr Speaker, is to ensure that all of those in aged care can receive the best quality aged care that can possibly be provided under the severe strains that are being imposed on the aged care system as a result of the pandemic. Now, those opposite, Mr Speaker, may wish to dismiss those pressures. They may wish to pretend that they are not there. And I think, Mr Speaker, that would diminish the great sacrifice and work that is being done by people in our aged care system to try and manage that support as best as they can, and have been supported with record support by the Commonwealth Government, Mr Speaker. I do not believe that the challenges that we're seeing in aged care facilities, Mr Speaker, should be a subject for the opposition to seek to exploit for political gain in this way. And I would urge the opposition, Mr Speaker, to work with the government to address this challenge and not, Mr Speaker, to undermine the confidence of Australians in an aged care sector that is clearly under pressure because of the pandemic, and all Australians are working as hard as they can to provide the best care they can, Mr Speaker.
The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Morrison government's long history of cutting taxes helping Australian families and businesses keep more of what they earn? How are our values of keeping taxes low securing our economic recovery? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer, the Manager of Opposition Business, on a point of order in relation to the question.
You've previously made a ruling about alternative policies being allowed to be asked about. but it hasn't been raised at the end of a question before as to what your ruling is on alternative approaches where it doesn't go to policies. This question, if I may put it, standing orders are quite clear that ministers can be asked about their area of responsibility. You have allowed that to be extended to policies that are not within their responsibility. To allow that tag and for it to go to approaches beyond policy takes it completely beyond the responsibility of the minister, outside practice and outside standing orders.
I thank the Manager of Opposition Business for the point of order. I'm happy to stand corrected on this, but from memory, you raised that on day one in relation to policies and approaches. I'm happy to have that debate with you on another day, but that's my recollection that you raised both those issues on day one of me taking the chair. In my view, the question remains within the standing orders, and I'm happy to, I'll rule that the question is valid and the Treasurer has the call.
Very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wentworth for his question. I had the opportunity to join him recently in his electorate to visit a small business to see how they had benefited from JobKeeper, and now their doors are open and they're continuing to employ a significant number of staff. Now, Mr Speaker, when the Coalition came to government, we took over from a Labor Party that had put in place more than $90 billion in higher taxes. And we remember them: the carbon tax, the mining tax, higher taxes on superannuation, higher taxes on income earners. And since we've come to government, we've been cutting taxes. Cutting taxes for families, Mr Speaker. Cutting taxes for small businesses to their lowest level in 50 years. Putting in place the largest investment incentives using the tax system in Australia's history. The net result of our initiatives have helped drive the unemployment rate to 4.2%, the lowest in more than 13 years, and now on a track to the lowest in some 50 years, Mr Speaker. That is our economic record: cutting taxes and creating more jobs. But we can't put our economic recovery at risk with a Leader of the Opposition, a Leader of the Labor Party, who believes in higher taxes, Mr Speaker. You see, Labor has opposed our tax cuts every step of the way. You know, the Leader of the Opposition said about our tax cuts for families, Mr Speaker, that they were the top end of town. He described families and small businesses as the top end of town. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition went to the last election supporting a retirees tax, a housing tax, more taxes on superannuation, more taxes on income earners, and a tax on family business. And you know what the Leader of the Opposition said about those taxes? That Labor had a, quote, strong mandate for them, Mr Speaker, a strong mandate. And he supported the carbon tax, Mr Speaker, and he said he was determined to get on with it. And he supported the mining tax, and he said that the mining companies should pay for it. That was his language, Mr Speaker, language he can't walk away from. And the Leader of the Opposition has also, at a previous Labor conference, moved a motion in favour of death duties, Mr Speaker. Death duties.
The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
You're just lying.
The Manager of Opposition on a point of order.
Point of order.
Opposition Business on a point of order.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker. The Treasurer has now gone to completely inventing things that are not true, going down a curious path of...
The Manager of Opposition Business will go to the point of order.
Yeah, the point of order is how can it be relevant to a question when it's not his ministerial responsibility and it's not even true? So how does that find its way into being allowed now in question time?
The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business knows full well that I can't be an arbiter of fact as to whether something is true or not. The Manager of Opposition Business knows that. The Manager of Opposition... No, the Treasurer will resume his seat. Manager of Opposition Business on the... The Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, I respect what you're saying in terms of you having to be the adjudicator of what is true and what is not. But you can make rulings about what is in the responsibility of a minister. This cannot be.
Just one note. No, the Leader of the House will resume his seat. Are you finished?
Yeah, I can keep going.
No, I'm quite fine, thank you. The Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, firstly, it's very clear that the Leader of the Opposition is not a minister, so the point about ministerial responsibility, of course, has no relevance to him. Mr Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition has a point to make in terms of claiming to have been misrepresented, there's a form of the House where that can be dealt with. That's after question time, not during the course of question time, Mr Speaker.
Just wait one moment. I'm having trouble hearing the Leader of the House because of the interjections on my left.
I'm very happy to speak up, Mr Speaker, so those opposite can hear as well, because this chamber is a contest of ideas and a test of character, and if he doesn't want his character tested, Mr Speaker, he shouldn't be sticking his hand up for the job that he seeks.
All right. No, I don't. On a point of order.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
On a point of order, on the point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Exactly. Mr Speaker, my concern with where this is going, and it includes the comments just made by the Leader of the House, is if it is in order for a question in question time to just ask for a general spray, where it is in order for people to say anything at all, then what will occur in this chamber in terms of the dignity of the House is not one which will bring this House's standing up, but will reduce it further. Earlier today we had a debate in this House at 12 o'clock where we spoke about, and it was relating to gender and behaviour, but we spoke about the need to lift standards, and this sort of stuff will just drag it.
The Leader of the House will resume his seat. I'm sorry, the opposition Leader will resume his seat. What I would say is that, as I have previously said in the last year, referring particularly to the Jenkins report that we discussed so well and debated so well today, in a respectful manner, that I believe that the Australian Parliament and the Australian people are looking for a greater degree of respect in this place. On that, I do agree. Now, in relation to the original point of order that was raised by the Manager of Opposition Business, the Treasurer is entitled to, when the question is asked about alternative approaches or alternative policies, he is entitled to address any alternatives other than the government's. But I would remind the House that that should be done in a respectful manner and not by way of personal attacks. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I was saying about the Leader of the Labor Party, previously he has said, I am pleased to move this resolution calling upon the government to consider the imposition of an inheritance tax, Mr Speaker. Now, that is what the Leader of the Opposition has previously said to a Labor Party conference. No wonder the member for Fenner has said the Albanese supporters were known as the Bolsheviks, Mr Speaker. The Albanese supporters were known as the Bolsheviks.
Time has expired. The Treasurer's time has expired. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I move that so much as standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion immediately. That the House 1 notes, A, in the third year of the pandemic, aged care remains in crisis, with almost 12,000 aged care residents and workers infected with COVID in more than 1,100 facilities as of Friday, and over 600 deaths among aged care residents this year. B, tens of thousands of aged care residents are still waiting for a booster dose. C, aged care facilities have been left without rapid antigen tests and PPE. D, aged care residents have been left without food, water and medical care because the government's surge workforce strategy was inadequate. And E, despite aged care being in crisis, the Minister for Aged Care Services has declared the sector is performing exceptionally well. And 2, therefore, calls on the Prime Minister to immediately sack his Minister for Aged Care Services, and B, apologise to aged care residents and their families for his failure to listen and act on countless warnings about the continuing crisis in aged care.
Is leave granted?
Well, Mr Speaker, this is question time, so leave is not granted.
Leave is not granted. Leave is not granted.
Standing orders be suspended, as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion immediately. That the House 1 notes, A, in the third year of the pandemic, aged care remains in crisis with almost 12,000 aged care residents and workers infected with COVID in more than 1,100 facilities as of Friday, and over 600 deaths among aged care residents this year. B, tens of thousands of aged care residents are still waiting for a booster dose. C, aged care facilities have been left without rapid antigen tests and PPE. D, aged care residents have been left without food, water and medical care because the government's surge workforce strategy was inadequate. And E, despite aged care being in crisis, the Minister for Aged Care Services has declared the sector is performing exceptionally well. And 2, therefore, calls on the Prime Minister to immediately sack the Minister for Aged Care Services, and B, apologise to aged care residents and their families for his failure to listen and act on countless warnings about the continuing crisis in aged care. Mr Speaker, this aged care system is in crisis, and this government is too distracted by its internal war.
They haven't given the call to the Leader of the House yet. The Leader of the House has the call. The Leader of the House? The Leader of the House has the call. No, I just hadn't given him the call yet. No, I didn't.
Mr Speaker, I move the member be no longer heard.
The question is that the Leader of the Opposition be no longer heard. All those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Noes have it. Is a division required? Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question is that the member be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Nichols and Gray as tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Werriwa and Lawler as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 59. Therefore, the question is resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The member for Hotham.
Seconded. Speaker, the Prime Minister's continuous attempt in question time today to minimise this crisis is a disgrace.
The member for Hotham will resume her seat. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move the motion be put.
The question is that the Manager of Opposition Business.
There is no question before the House at the moment. A question hasn't been stated, and the member for Hotham should return to be given the call if a motion was moved that's not allowed at this point. The call should go back to the member for Hotham. You'd have to sit down and have another go. We know you will, but...
Order. Order. The Manager of Opposition will resume his seat. You're seeking the call. The call does go back to the member for Hotham. The Leader of the House will resume his seat. The member for Hotham has the call.
Speaker, 622 people have lost their lives in aged care this year, and the Prime Minister seeks to minimise those deaths.
The member for Hotham will resume her seat. The Leader of the House.
I move the member be no longer heard.
The question is that the member be no further heard. All those that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Is a division required? Ring the bells for 1 minute. Where's that? Where's that? Lock the doors. The question is that the member be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and those to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Nichols and Gray as tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Werriwa and Lawler as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 59, and the matter is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is in chaos. Aged care is in chaos because the people opposite are not doing their job.
You need to state the question as soon as you've got a second.
He doesn't know how to do his job, the one opposite. The Prime Minister goes missing every time there's a crisis.
The Manager of Opposition Business will withdraw that comment. The Manager of Opposition Business, was that a reflection on the chair that you just made?
No, I pointed to the Prime Minister.
Well,
I think you're doing your job. I don't think the Leader of the House is. I don't think the Prime Minister is.
Well,
and certainly the Minister for Aged Care
when the Manager of Opposition Business says you're, he's reflecting on the chair.
Well, I can assure you, I assure you, Mr. Speaker, and if you go back check the video, I was pointing squarely to the person who got the last procedure wrong.
All right. The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move that the member be no longer heard.
The question is that the member be no further heard. All those that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. Yeah. Lock the doors. The question is that the member be no further heard. I appoint the same tellers for the ayes and for the noes as the previous division. Members, if they wish to change their votes, should direct their attention to the tellers. Otherwise, they should remain in their seats. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 59. Therefore, the matter is resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion be disagreed to. All of those in that opinion say aye. Order. 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 The member will resume her seat. The question is that the motion. I have to put the question. The question is, I have to state the question, and the question is that the motion be disagreed to.
Have you given her the call?
I haven't given the member the call. The member for Franklin has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If this Prime Minister and the Minister had done their job, thousands of residents in aged care would be being...
The Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Now that they've run out of time for question time, I move the question be put.
The question is that the motion is the question be put. All those that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Is a division required? Ring the bells for 1 minute. Lock the doors. The question is that the member be no further heard. No. The question is that the question be put. All those that opinion say aye. I'm sorry. Beg your pardon. The question is that the question be put. All those that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Nichols and Gray as tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Werriwa and Lawler as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 59. The question now is that the motion be disagreed to. All those that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Is a division required? Ring the bells for 1 minute. Lock the doors. The question is that the motion be disagreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint once again the honourable members for Nichols and Gray as tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Werriwa and Lawler as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 63, noes 59. Therefore, the matter is resolved in the affirmative. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice.